All right, so first observations, the Canon S95 compared to the Ricoh GRD IV. Both of these are CCD based cameras. This one came out in 2010. The Ricoh came out in 2011. I love these two cameras. I love the image quality. And while they're really close together in age and they're the same pixel resolution, they're very different cameras. Now I'm gonna do a video, my next video will be really on the ergonomics and handling the two cameras. In this video, I wanted to post a sample side-by-side image right away so people could see the real differences between the two. Because the Ricoh, at the end of the day, is a significantly more expensive camera than the Canon S95. Now, if we think back in time to when these cameras came out, back in 2010, Canon was an absolute powerhouse in the digital photography camera market. I mean, if you think about all the amazing DSLRs that they were producing, and you can see it in this camera when you look at the imagery and you look at the color science, it's really beautiful. When you look at the Ricoh image, you can see it's a different mentality and a different approach. Whereas this camera has a zoom, this camera has a fixed lens. This camera's f2, this camera's f1.9. You know, subtle differences, but also when I'm looking at the RGB spaces, when I'm looking at the raw file, bringing them in, I find that the Canon camera is very sharp and smoother in terms of the file. Whereas the Ricoh is even sharper, but I do feel a little more texture in the actual image itself, which does give the image a little bit more of a 3D quality, a little bit more of a film quality, and a little bit less of that really smooth look that you can sometimes get from digital cameras. So I'm gonna do a deep dive in my next video, looking at the color spaces. I'm gonna map the spaces. I'm gonna try to see what's really going on in the background and do a lot more test images. I'm doing some long exposure stuff and really excited to see where this can go. So the two test prints that I have to show you are on my table. I made them once again on my Canon 4600, love it. It was just done on Epson luster paper, you know, cost effective, nice paper, and very sharp. And the reason I'm not showing you the files on a screen is I'm a firm believer that the proof is in the pudding and the pudding is the print. I mean, I gotta see a print. I wanna see how ink and paper respond. I'm not doing it on a matte paper because I really wanna see just how sharp the dots are. So why don't I stop talking and holding these cameras in my hand, and we'll go over and we'll take a look at the two prints. All right, so here's our two prints. The Ricoh is on the left, the Canon is on the right. And you will notice that they were shot on different days, similar light, but not exactly the same light. I apologize for that. We're having a lot of rain in Vermont, and it's really hard to predict when I'm gonna be able to get even light to make these shots at the same time. One thing you can see is, and I've noticed this on all the files so far, the Ricoh has better shadow detail on a standard shot that I'm getting out of the Canon. The Canon is really lovely and is controlling the contrast quite nice, and I will get a little closer here in a second to the prints, but the Ricoh on everything that I do does have a slightly more expansive shadow range, which is really nice. Both these images are controlling contrast and the color, by the way, on both of them is beautiful. But let me get a little closer now, and I'll show you some details that I want to point out. So once again, when I'm here looking at the Canon image, this is with the Canon S95, the things that I find that show me sort of the quality of the lens issues is there's a lot of CA in the image. You can see this purple fringing on a lot of the objects. I don't see any CA at all on the Ricoh image. There is no chromatic aberration. And that's really impressive that it's so well controlled. But on the Canon, you know, probably because it's a zoom lens, there are places where it really is visible. However, what I would say though, is that any amount of CA that I'm seeing is easy enough to remove in 2025 in Photoshop, so I wouldn't overly stress about it. When I look at the overall skin tones, on the Canon, the one thing I noticed was that the hair can get a little wormy looking. When you get into really fine detail like that, it can start to over sharpen. Now, perhaps in the raw editing, if I turn to the sharpening down almost all the way, I could get rid of that, maybe. But it wasn't very high. This was only like a 20, which is quite low. So that's a possibility that that could come down in that process. Well, when I look at Eve here, and this is with the Ricoh, it has a different feeling to it. The hair doesn't get that wormy sort of feel. It just feels natural. And look at the back wall here. you see how the back wall, this is that texture that I'm talking about, that I'm seeing from the sensor itself. It's really beautiful. It's really film-like. When I come back over to the Canon image, you can see how smooth the back wall is. There's not a lot of texture in that wood, whereas there is texture in that wood. So the Ricoh to me has a higher film quality to it, to me, compared to the Canon. But to be honest, it's no slouch. I also decided to take the Ricoh image and to run it through one of my favorite emulation softwares and add just a little bit of film grain and a little bit of more film color to it, specifically trying to create the look of Portra 160. And so I have that print right here, and I'll show you those two side by side, because this is really important to me, is how is the image going to look if I was making it for myself as a finished piece. And you can see that little bit of film grain that I added and the wonderful texture. Look at her arm and the film grain compared to the straight out of the camera digital file. This is really good. I can see why so many people are so impressed with the Ricoh in terms of its overall look. However, if you were going more for the look and really trying to get the color and the texture and the grain and the dimensional quality, adding just that little bit of grain really made just a huge difference. Started looking at the two images again. Once again, the Ricoh is on the left, the Canon's on the right. They both have a great look. I do think the Ricoh has an edge in terms of just the textural quality and the overall film-like feeling. However, it's significantly more expensive than a Canon S95, and the S95 looks really good. Whereas on the Ricoh file, I may not have to do much in the way of an emulation to get that look of film. I wouldn't have to do what I did like on this image here to make it look more like film. It already kind of has that look right out the door. The Canon, if I wanted it, I could very easily apply that same filter to here and it would look fantastic. So I'm loving both cameras. I'm hoping you're finding seeing these two test prints to be interesting. Once again though, the Canon does suffer from CA more than the Ricoh for sure. I couldn't find any on it. Okay, so I hope you found looking at those prints interesting. Once again, I think the Ricoh just, to me, is just the most film-like, but it's a very subtle difference between this and the S95, but it is a difference. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please like and subscribe. Thank you very much for listening, and go shoot some more film and maybe a few digital pictures as well.